Hello, my name is Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant. I coach some of the world's top executives and management teams, helping them achieve bigger and more meaningful results than ever before. In this season, I'm speaking with C-suite leaders from around the globe to find out what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught them and what wisdom they have to share for other leaders. Welcome to Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times. Today, I speak with Bhavesh Vaghela, who is the CEO of Singula Decisions. Singula is a subscriber intelligence and subscriber management platform for pay TV and similar services. And in this conversation, we get into some really interesting topics. Bhavesh dares, he's vulnerable, he shares at quite a deep level. And we really look at his experience of the chaos of COVID lockdown, the habits to build to support people through uncertainty, what he did, what worked and what didn't, why he replaced top leaders right in the chaos of lockdown, just at that moment when you think shaking the organization up like that would be the wrong thing, why it was the right thing. He talks about dealing with fear as a CEO, and what to do about that, and his own struggles through that time. And finally, how to connect and inspire the team, even in the midst of remote working and all the challenges of this year. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Bhavesh Vaghela. Hi, Bhavesh.
Hey, how you doing, Richard?
Great, thank you. Yeah, good to see you. And thanks for joining me today.
No, thank you for inviting me.
So as you know, we're talking today about leadership lessons for challenging times. It's been a challenging time for all of us this year, the COVID year. But before we dive in, let's just find out a little bit about you. Do you want to give people, just in 60 seconds or so, the elevator pitch, right? Who is Bhavesh and what is Singula Decisions?
Sure, no problem at all. So who am I? I'm a B2B marketeer. That's my passion. I've worked at various software businesses over the last close to 20 years, been acquired multiple times, pretty much marketed different software all around the world. So I've been a CMO and supported various software businesses, as I said earlier. I've been CEO relatively new. I'm about 2.5 years into my first CEO post. And the company I work for is called Singula Decisions, as you mentioned. What do we do? Well, we help subscription-based businesses, what we say, find and execute their perfect growth strategy. So that's all about, if you're a pay TV or an OTT service, we all have, probably Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all those types of companies. What we're about is about helping those brands really understand their subscribers to try and drive growth, and we do that through technology. Through data and insights, and we do that through people.
Fantastic. So subscription services, lots of people doing things. You need to understand who's doing what, how's it working, where are the opportunities in the business, where's the insights, who's churning, who's ready for upselling, why are people coming on, all those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Perfect. So why don't we just dive straight in? I know you're running a company. You say it's been a trial by fire, right? CEO a couple of years, and you get COVID. I know you have about 150 people in the organization, right? So there's a lot of people, people whose livelihood depends on you to some sense, and you got customers around the world. And then we get into this unparalleled moment in COVID. So what if you just look back, obviously we're not out of it yet, we're recording this in the autumn, so we've had the lockdown period, we've had the summer, a bit of a breather, and now we're having this kind of second wave or concerns about that emerging. As you look back so far with the perspective that we have, what's been your top leadership lesson? What's been your top learning point?
There's been so many that you kind of look back on. I think my biggest lesson really is about being close to your people. I think that's probably the biggest thing. There's so many things that you can do with customers and make sure you maintain customers, try and win new business. All that stuff is great. and it's very challenging. But the reality is, you've got 150 people, and they're all worried, they're all stressed, they're all having to go through lockdown, like you are as well as an individual, like I am. And I think my biggest lesson really is, and I think it's one of the biggest achievements really, is the fact that we have, I would argue, have a stronger team now as an organization than we arguably did before we walked in. And that's mainly because, we've maybe it's the old British spirit. We kind of got together and realized as an organization and as people in that organization, we have to help each other. We have to help each other through this process. And at the same time, we have to make sure we maintain the level of service that we have for our customers. Because the interesting thing for us is subscription services don't stop during COVID. In fact, in some customers, they are booming, especially to entertainment subscription services. And we also have sports subscription services. So in that situation, they're struggling because sports cancel. So, we have had to completely go from an office-based environment with operational staff in contact center all the way through to, R&D and software development teams, and overnight work from home. And the whole operation still has to perform.
And so how do you do that? How do you bring the team closer together than they ever were before, given all those constraints?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I used to do, I'm a great believer, I think, I'd like to think, and I hope I'm right in this, but I'd like to think that I'm a very transparent person. So I try and be very honest with my teams as to what's going on in the business and where we're heading. And, that is all about raising that bar continually. So for me, I used to run kind of one-to-ones on a more quarterly basis. As soon as we started going into lockdown, I did one-to-ones every day. So I went through the whole staff pretty much over a period of 5 to 6 weeks, and I cycled through continually. So that was all about just touching base with every single person in my organization, not about talking about the business. I didn't actually want to talk about the business at all. Check in, see how they work. Right, that's one of the first things I did.
And just to pick up on that, I mean, what you did there is one of the impact multipliers that I've talked about earlier on in this podcast, about mastering transformation. And this is a tiny micro example, but I think it's just worth picking up on. It's like establishing the habit to say, let me just get a habit in that every day there's one person I speak to. And then once you build the habit into your diary, it's there at 9 o'clock or whatever it is in the morning for 20 minutes, then you've implemented it and it just becomes part of the way that you work, right? And the benefits accrue over time, like a flywheel, right? It kind of gradually builds up.
Absolutely. And, and we also started to do things like, I challenged the team to say, look, I want you to pick up the phone, or the Zoom in this context, I guess, to somebody that you've never spoken to in the business, or they're not your best friends or your colleagues, and want you to have a coffee chat with them. Just random chat, check in on them, see how they are. But that person who's had the coffee chat has to then pay it forward and keep on doing that. And that, look, don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect from day one, and you have one round and then stops, and then you have to kind of keep engineering it. But that certainly helps the whole kind of mental state of everybody. I mean, we're all in the same boat. So that's my biggest lesson. I think my biggest lesson is that human element, that sometimes when you're in a normal environment, you just expect people to work, right? And that's quite harsh in some ways, but it's just because that's the way it is. Whereas actually now, you're very more cognizant of people's lives and the balances that they take in order to work for an organization. And I think it's a very, very valuable lesson. And I think as a company, as I said before, we've got closer as a result of that. And I think people are, certainly looking after each other more than perhaps they would have done in the office.
Yeah, I think every organization, every team has to really think about tasks, behaviors, and learning. Very often we totally over-rotate onto tasks.
Totally.
Get it? I get it, totally get it, right? Results to here to know the rest of it. And it can work when things are stable. But when the rules of the game change, you've got to watch out about learning, right? Are we actually learning? Are we adapting? And also, you have to attend to behaviors and relationships. And are we actually, it's not just what are we doing, but how are we doing, what are we doing, right? Because those things, as you say, if you don't have that foundation and people feel supported and happy in the way it's working, then the tasks just don't get the same level of attention. If
Yeah,
people are concerned, especially, or freaked out or depressed, it's certainly not going to happen.
absolutely. You know, one of the things that we did as well, which was a very conscious decision, where we used to have a town hall. I mean, everybody does these town halls, perhaps, you know, once a month and so forth. We were doing that as well, in person town halls every month, but we turned them into weekly roundups. So every Friday, 12 o'clock, the company gets together, and I just talk through what's going on in the week. And now more and more, it's become part of our operating week.
Right.
And you know, we're getting more and more people talking about the stuff they've done that week, and we're trying to really share the good stuff, because there's so much negativity around us. You know, even the smallest thing, right? We managed to solve a particular problem. We should be sharing that and applauding that, because that makes us all feel we've achieved something, right? And
Absolutely.
it's again, it's that kind of repeatedness and trying to make it part of our DNA. It's certainly a big lesson for me.
Yeah, I always say, if I'm taking my kids up some hill or some mountain somewhere, if they look at where they're meant to be going, they get depressed and they want to leave the car.
Yeah.
Right. If they're halfway up and they get to look down at how far they've come, they're pretty motivated to do the next bit, the next hill, right? The next stretch. And I think often in business we forget that, and we're always looking at, like, what haven't we done, right? What's the gap? What's the target? What's the vision beyond the next, the next hill? How much more can we do before we conquer the entire universe? And actually looking back and just celebrating this week, we've moved forward. Is actually important.
Yeah, that's been a real big lesson, really.
So let's move on. What's been perhaps the most counterintuitive decision that you've had to make, or the most surprising result that you've seen?
Counterintuitive is quite interesting, because you know, to a certain degree, when you first go into lockdown, you know, there's this great article I read this week where you'll start worrying about, you know, whether you're doing the right thing, and there's, you know, you just start, you know, should I have all the answers? And I relate to all that, because it was a very challenging time just to try and navigate your own self and the way you're feeling, let alone trying to G everybody else up and make sure everybody else is comfortable. And in that scenario, I sat down one day, and I guess that's some of the, perhaps in the early days, you got a chance to just step away a little bit. And I sat down and I looked at the team that I had in my exec team at the time. And I sat down and looked at some, there's certain areas which I wasn't particularly comfortable we were driving at the pace we wanted to and where we needed to get to as a business. And I asked myself the question, you know, the people that I've got around my team, are they the right ones? And would they be able to help us as an organization get to where our target was at the end of the calendar year? The answer was no. When I sat down, the answer was no. And I'm thinking, okay, now, do I make changes now? And we're in the middle of lockdown. This is, you know, particularly a bad time to do this. And you know, I mean, you know, that decision gave me sleepless nights. I must be honest, it gave me sleepless nights. But I did. I made 2 significant executive team changes during lockdown, which meant the workload came to me and some of the others that were still remaining. And we completely hired new people in that process, which was another interesting lesson in this.
Right.
But I think that's the counterintuitive thing. It's the sometimes you're going to still make the hard decision, even in a point of crisis, because my instinct was saying, no, you know, we keep the people in stable. But actually, would have come out of lockdown and we wouldn't have moved forward in the same way. So I still had to think further on as to what you know, where we needed to get to, and I just felt it was the right decision to make. It was very hard, and then you have to G everybody up and make sure everybody understands why you made those decisions. So that was the real counterintuitive thing. It was almost the one thing I wouldn't have wanted to do, I did, and I feel it worked out for us. It could easily have, you know, been a car crash.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, isn't it? It's making the bold moves when they need to be made, and it's also having it's the instinct, right, to know, is this person right or not? And I've seen it both ways, right? I've actually seen people that were pretty much going to be let go during COVID, and because they needed stability, they were kept, and because actually the hard conversation happened though at that moment, and it was made very clear, look, this is the gap that we're seeing, and this is why we've got some concerns. A couple of cases they brought me in to actually support them in that journey, but those people actually turned around, right, and actually realized oh, here's the gap, here's where we need to step up. And so what I often say to people when they're going through that decision-making process is, right, sometimes there's a values issue, there's something very clear. Sometimes there's like one thing which is off base, and actually they've got to where they are for good reasons, but there's one thing which is just undermining what's going on, and that can be corrected. So I've seen it really both ways, and I think it's interesting that at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. You have to make that decision, and then you have to say, take it on. It might not be the easy decision.
Yeah, I mean, the ironic thing with it is, through that lockdown period, we had people that started on the first day. We never met them at all, apart from virtually via Zoom.
Yeah.
We've hired people through lockdown, and people have joined our team again completely virtually. Never met anybody physically. Senior as well as different levels within the business, and it's been I said the counterintuitive bit. It's really been a view of how do we shape the business moving forward, coming out of lockdown.
Right.
And to a certain degree, you're forced to think that way, but sometimes you can be focused so much on the day-to-day because it's a crisis that you can come out of the crisis and you haven't actually geared yourself up towards coming out the other side. And I'm not going to say I planned all that beforehand. That's not the case at all. But when I look back, I kind of feel we made some movements towards helping us come out of it in a better way than we walked in.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a time for laying foundations, actually, in a way, because there's a bit of space suddenly that's opened up.
Yeah,
potentially. So how has this period forced you to grow as a leader, Bhavesh? What's been your own story of growth as a CEO in the last few months?
I mean, I've been through everything. Everybody has. I've been through panic. I've been through fear. I've been through 150 people that I've got to maintain and keep the salaries going. I've had, there's a moment of when you stop to think too much, you really start panicking, right? And that's just human nature. And I try very hard not to. So I've really tried very hard to focus on the outcome at the end of the year. That's what I've really tried to stay true to. And I think as a leader, I feel that I've grown as a person because I've started to relate more to lots of people within my organization. And that's helped me really think about the acuteness of the things that we need to change or drive or evolve in order to take those people on the journey that we're trying to get to. So I think it's a lot about breaking comfort zones. It's also about being honest. I mean, I remember being on one of my roundups and telling people I had a rubbish week. I really struggled this week. I struggled in terms of, I'm worried about what's going on around me and my family and this and that. And I was just, some people would say, you don't do that kind of stuff. You've got to always remain upbeat and positive. But I felt, no, actually, that's me. That's what I'm going through. And actually, a lot of people that I'm in my teams are going through the same thing. And I got a lot of responses from that. And actually, I feel the same, or, that was really an appreciative comment. So I kind of opened up myself a little bit during the last 3-4 months, naturally, I think, more than consciously. And when I look back at it, I think that's helped me grow as a person that they feel hopefully comfortable with, that he's heading us in the right direction. And that's been an interesting journey for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Bhavesh. It's a powerful thing, right? When a leader can be vulnerable. Obviously, there's a time you want to be over vulnerable and overshare, right? But there is that moment when you take off the armor, and say, this is it. It's not always. I've got issues as well, right? I'm going through that, and I know for myself, I love to. My family story I've talked about. My sister's mentally handicapped. I always felt the need to be strong. I didn't realize it at the time. Looking back, I go, yeah, I was the one who was like, no problem for my parents. I got my good grades. I think it was probably because I realized they got enough on their plate. And I carry that with me, right? I want to be the one who supports people, who helps, who's strong and competent. But I know that when I lay that down and I'm honest with somebody, and say, yeah, but also whatever, right? I'm freaked out today, whatever is going on, then you actually connect at a deeper level.
Yeah, and I think, look, this is unprecedented times. I mean, it's the classic quote that everybody was saying. I can't stand there and say everything's hunky dory in my life when everybody else is in lockdown. Right? We're all in lockdown, so we all know it's not a great place to be in that situation. So there's no point lying about it. It is true, and hopefully that you can connect at a different level in that way. So I definitely feel it's when I first got the CEO job, Richard, you kind of almost feel you have to be somebody you're not. And you always have to say the right buzzwords, and you have to feel like, look, I'm this strong person, and I deserve to be the CEO. But actually, you learn to be who you are, right? And that's a journey that I've been on over the last 2.5 years as being CEO. I remember the first 6 months, I just felt like a rabbit in headlights. I was an imposter being in this role, right at the right place. So, I've learned a lot about myself in these last 2.5 years, but in particular the last 6 months, I think it's really helped me actually grab onto the thing that I'm trying to do, and it helped me around myself in a better place than when I first came in.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's when we attach ourselves to the mission, then we get out of our own way in a way, right? We're focused on what we have to, what people are counting on us for, and not all our own internal hang-ups.
Good.
So looking forward, what's the challenge going to be in the coming year? Obviously, lots of things coming on in the business, but how will you need to perhaps take your leadership up a step? Where's the edge for you in the coming year?
My edge for me is really about continuing to guide and communicate and drive the business in the right direction. Now, if we take all the macro stuff out of the way, we still have to continue to do the things at the highest standard we can on a consistent regular basis. And that's very hard because we're all human beings. I mean, we've seen the dip. When we first come into lockdown, everybody rallies around, and you've got the in a perverse way, an excitement of getting through this. We're going to get through this. And after a while, it's okay, we're still doing this, and now I've got to try and school my kids, and all these things are going on, and everybody's struggling. So you end up with a dip. So I think the biggest challenge is going to be keeping that momentum that we've built consistent, and it will come to a plateau, which is the right working pace. Because right now, I think as a business, we probably are too much on one direction, which is, we're on Zoom calls all the time. So, people don't have the time to actually do their jobs because they're spending more time on Zoom calls.
Yeah.
We've got to start breaking our working day practices different to where we were before. So I think that's going to be a challenge. How do we work around what a normal day looks like now, such that we are productive and continue to remain productive while picking each other up? Because we're all going to have moments where we're down and up, but we've all got to collectively help ourselves through. If we do those things well, then we give ourselves the chance of delivering what we need for our clients, winning new business and growing our business. So, but there's lots of challenges at that end, lots of stuff we've got to do. But in terms of just maintaining the momentum and the energy levels is probably the hardest thing because we're all virtual.
Yes. Yeah, and there's been a dip, right? There's been the all actions, all hands to the pump, happened, and now there's a bit of a dip, and people realize this is going to drag out, and they're not going to see everybody for necessarily as quick as they wanted. And I think you're right about the Zoom call thing, and I've seen that in corporate world there's been an issue for a while in many ways. I think there's a real need for companies to kind of establish, to agree a rhythm.
That's correct.
A rhythm, right? So like it might be, hey guys, let's just like 9 to 11 in the morning. That's our focus time. Let's like we just don't do calls at that time, or whatever it is. Actually, everyone, let's all do our team calls on Mondays at 11 because then everyone has their team call at the same time, and we don't have all the scheduling issues because everybody's doing calls at different times. You can never get in touch with the right person, whatever it is. But I think finding that rhythm so that people kind of are in the right zone at the right time, that they know when they focus, they're not going to have to distract them. They're not going to have to stop a whole lot of Slack messages coming in for people who are trying to get on the phone with them or whatever. They know this time is kind of understood in the company. And I think if we can make those kind of things, which in a physical situation can still happen, but you can give more cues, more signs. You can shut yourself in the office. You can put your headphones in. You can show people that you're not available. I think those things can make a difference.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's getting to that rhythm that it's the norm now. This is the way we're going to work.
Yeah.
For the foreseeable future. It's not going to change. I mean, it's recently we've seen some of our staff go back into the office, but they've selected to be on a Friday to have a team call, a team meeting together. And it's almost flipped, right? It's flipped from being working from home maybe the odd day to now working from home 4 days and going in for 1 day, right? And those kind of things. And that's how I see it. I've always been, and I've always, as I said, working for software companies all my life. It's always been flexible in that way. And so I'm a believer and a fan of that. However, if everybody's doing it, then you end up with Zoom. I mean, Zoom fatigue is not a word, right? And people talk about Zoom fatigue.
Yeah.
And I know what I'm like. I seem to have started earlier and earlier, and I've ended later and later.
Right.
And I've got to start breaking that cycle. Otherwise, it just becomes the normal way of doing it. And that's not good for anybody because we'll burn out much quicker.
Yeah, I think it's really being clear about the boundaries and that you want to put onto that's sustainable. And as you said as well, as when everybody's virtual with a bit of office time, the question then becomes who comes in when. When I was at Cisco, everybody, who they'd really made this transition 12 years ago. The problem was it had gone so far so quickly that you went into the office, you could never find any of your colleagues because they all, you came in on a Wednesday, they came in on a Thursday, and you missed each other.
Of course.
And that actually negatively reinforces, and I won't even go in at all because nobody's ever there.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if you ask people, they'd actually quite love to go in a couple of times a week and see people. But if you don't coordinate that, if there's not, again, a kind of a cultural expectation, this business unit is always in on a Tuesday, this division tends always to be in on a Wednesday, then without that, it can actually be hard to get back into the practice of meeting up.
Oh, completely. And I think, that's the challenge, right? That's, if we're successful at the end of the year, it's because we've been able to come up with a rhythm for our business now and our staff and that maintains our standards and continues to improve our standards because, we've got a long way to go in some areas and we've always got to continue to improve. But just because there's these things going on around us doesn't mean we shouldn't be driving for better standards in what we do. So, but it's also difficult to drive that standard when people are burning themselves out on Zoom calls all day. And that's a big challenge for us. We haven't solved it in any shape or form. That is currently where we are right now. It is just Zoom meltdown is probably what it is.
So plenty more we could talk about there, but I'm aware of time's moving on. Let me just ask you a few quick fire questions just to get a sense of what's your world, right? What are your influences? If you're a rock band, right, what would your influences be? Who's a leader that inspires you?
A leader that inspires me. I could be cliche and talk about Steve Jobs. I can talk about others, but I would say, the person that inspires me the most, and again, this is very cliche-ish, is actually my parents. My dad is, very calm, very thoughtful in terms of what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And I've learned a lot from that. I've read books from Steve Jobs and others, and you pick up bits and bobs from those individuals, and you think, wow, that's amazing. You did a fantastic job. But I don't hold anybody in the pedestal that says, you guys do amazingly well, because everybody does a great job in the circumstances they're in at that point in time. You're there to learn from everybody. So I wouldn't want to say I'm inspired by a particular individual. I'm a big sports fan. So, if you want to ask me who I want to have dinner with, I'd probably say Thierry Henry and Dennis Bergkamp, because I'm an Arsenal fan, right?
Okay.
I'd love to sit down with Arsène Wenger and understand how he thought about the team and how he built his team, and those sort of things fascinate me, but not a specific business leader as such.
No, but I think it's great. Actually, talk about your father. It's kind of a cliche, but not everybody would say that about their father. But it's also, for me, goes back to that thing that leadership is really, influence is that proximity, and it's about caring for people, and it's about challenging them as well, right? And when you have people that do that for you, it makes a mark. What about a favorite quote or motto?
Oh, favorite quote or motto. There's two things that I've learned along the way. I've had some fantastic mentors that have helped me along the way, and in my marketing hat on, there's two things that I kind of lived by when I was doing campaigns and thinking about strategies and marketing. One was, you really should not be, I guess, marketing to the center of the table. Always going to market to the edge of the table. I don't know if that quote even exists, but the notion that always push the boundaries and continue to push the boundaries. Because if you're sitting in the middle of the table, everybody else is in the same place. So you can't differentiate. So I've always been somebody that has tried to think, how can we push the envelope? And I've always tried that. The other thing, certainly very resonates with me as a B2B marketeer, is you're not actually selling or you're not marketing to a business at all. It's not business to business at all. It's business to an individual.
Yeah.
So, I've always felt that I was taught early on in my career to think about the functional and the emotional, the transactional and the emotional connection from a marketing message point of view. Because actually, a buyer is still a human being sitting in a company that has to have that emotional trigger to purchase. So I've learned those are two things that certainly has always stuck with me. I'm a big fan of trying and failing. Keep on going, keep on going, keep on trying. But those two really have always stuck with me from a very early part of my career.
Yeah, that's great. They're both pretty memorable actually, and the idea of connecting with the individuals in the business. I mean, it's so funny if you look at how so many business presentations, decks, they totally miss that, right? It's totally just full of like, here's a whole load of functions that you might like to have in this product for your business, and there's no real connection with this is actually a person that's meant to be listening to this. This stuff.
It's hard, right? I mean, it's when you look at B2B, especially tech marketing, right? B2B tech marketing is it's full of functions and features. That's what it is, right? And it's very hard to step away from that and think very emotionally. I mean, in my very early days working for a company, my first campaign I ran was around compliance, and it was at Sarbanes-Oxley times. And no disrespect to any compliance officers, but they're kind of like accountants, right? They're not the most perception is not as if they're the most exciting people. But I figured that they are human beings, and everybody was talking about doom and gloom about you're going to go to jail if you don't do this correctly, and blah 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 blah. And I thought, well, let's spin it, and we created this campaign called "I Love Compliance," and it was I Heart Compliance, like a bumper sticker, 70s themed. I managed to convince my boss at the time, who was on the board, he was a founder, and I convinced him. I was very lucky actually because he was okay to try things. And imagine a lot of people would have just shut me down and said, what are you talking about? That's not going to work. And it was really funny because the campaign went out. I was very nervous. And I got a phone call from my boss, who was just come out of the tube. I mean, we were in London. And he was so excited. And he goes, I said, what happened? He goes, well, I was sitting in the tube and somebody was working on their laptop. And on the opposite side of the laptop, somebody had stuck the I Love Compliance sticker, branded with the company name and so forth. So all of a sudden, it got a little bit of emotion connection. And we used to have these compliance officers in banks call us up and say, can we have more stickers? It was just really fascinating. But as I said, I was incredibly lucky because I worked for bosses that were willing to try things. Easily somebody could have shut me down at that point, and I would have never wanted to try something new again. That's what I mean by having a bit of fun with stuff, right?
I love it. Well, perhaps that can be your third motto. I love compliance. There you go.
Yeah, we'll always love compliance.
Well, hey, it's been great speaking, Bhavesh. Where can people find out a bit more about you or about Singula? How would they get in touch?
So, if you want to go to singuladecisions.com, you can do. I'm available on LinkedIn, so you can just find me with Bhavesh Vaghela. And, all my contact details are there. So happy to have conversations. I'd love to learn more. And if anybody has any views on subscription businesses, we can help. If anybody just wants to have a chat over a coffee, over Zoom during these times, again, totally open and happy to have those chats.
That's very generous. Thanks, Bhavesh. Great to speak, and thank you for all your insights.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Bye now. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's turn to you. If you're a top performer who's already accomplished great things and yet knows that there's a whole new level of impact and potential open to you, then why don't we get on the phone and strategize on how to get you there? Head over to xquadrant.com/speak to find out more. Until next time, be bold and be purposeful.